And is there a chance that, well, coming back to Tucker's interview, that Europe also watches this interview as we speak, more and more people, is there a chance that this is all house of cards? This is this fear mongering will be dead, not even finally born.
There's always that chance. I mean, but again, war is an extension of politics by other means. There's a political war going on in Europe right now, and as I pointed out, the last month of the war in Europe for the United States was the bloodiest month. There's no doubt that the political and economic elite in Europe are going the way of the dinosaur. Their day is finished, but that doesn't mean they're going to go gently. I think they're going to paraphrase Dylan Thomas, they're going to rage against the dying of the light. They're going to struggle. They're going to fight to stay relevant. And the final moments of their time in power could be very chaotic moments. And this is where you need a leader like a Vladimir Putin, and you need an approach like that of the Russian Federation, one of pragmatism and responsibility, not to overreact, but to be patient. Wait for the outcome to present itself, not try and force the outcome. And so I think that Russia will just sit back and watch Europe implode. This house of cards will come tumbling down.
And what is interesting, that even Polish president recently de facto acknowledged that Crimea is Russian territory. So he said, he said, well, I have to acknowledge historically Crimea was Russia's for a longer time than Ukrainian, meaning that. And what do you think that this is a sign that Polish says, we wash our hands on this. We wash our hands on Ukraine. We're not going to go into trouble for Ukraine, and, we're going to stay away. This is the first part of small question. And another, that means that Poland doesn't believe this notion that Russia is going to hit.
Well, remember, it's a counter offer. Remember, Europe still labors under the impression that they have leverage at the negotiating table with Russia, that Russia is desperate to come to the table and is looking for a compromise. And so what the Polish leader is saying is, we'll give you Crimea, Russia, with the understanding that Ukraine gets everything else back. Well, no, this is why it's such a stupid statement. One, I was just in Crimea. I met with the Crimean governor. I met with other people in Crimea. I don't think they're losing any sleep over what the Polish politicians think about the fate of Crimea. I don't think they care what anybody says about Crimea other than the Russian people and the Russian government. They know their Crimea, and that's all that matters. They don't care. So I just wish people would stop quoting Polish presidents and German chancellors and French presidents and British prime ministers and, European Union this and that. They don't matter. They don't matter. Russia doesn't care what they think. Because if Russia did care and said, "Whoa, wow, thank you, you gave us Crimea," what's that say about Russia's position? I mean, does Russia believe that Crimea is Russia? If they do, then why does it matter what anybody says? And if you're going to enter in that argument, what happens when he says, but Kherson isn't? But Zaporizhia isn't. But Donetsk isn't. But Lugansk isn't Russian. You see the trap that's being set here? So, Russia, the appropriate thing is, hey, thank you very much, but we don't care. We know what is Russia. And Russia is all of new Russia. And then Vladimir Putin put a pretty expansive definition of what new Russia is. See, once Russia starts accepting the scraps thrown to them by Western politicians, I guess Crimea is yours. Even Tucker Carlson was guilty of that after the interview. Crimea is Russia, of course, is, hey, Tucker, No kidding, dude. But shut up. The Russians don't care what you think about Crimea because the Russians care about all of Russia, and all of Russia includes New Russia, which is going to include Odessa, Mykolaiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkov, whether you like it or not. No Russian gives a damn what Tucker Carlson thinks about Crimea, or should give a damn. And they shouldn't give a damn what anybody in Poland thinks about it either. It's going to be what it is. Russia's not looking for a negotiated settlement. If they were, then all these territories will be given back because that's a compromise. Russia's done negotiating. Russia will end the war the way they want to end the war. And it's Ukraine's fault. As the Russian president indicated, had they accepted the Istanbul Agreement, Kherson would be Ukrainian. Zaporizhia would be Ukrainian. And more importantly, the status of the Donbass would be open to discussion. Crimea, of course, is off the table. The Ukrainian nationalists lost that when they threatened Crimea after the Maidan coup. Not up for debate. But these territories, this new Russian territory, as Putin said, we may have historical disputes about the legitimacy of how Ukraine was created, but we agreed when the Soviet Union went down, we agreed that the borders would be that defined by the republics at the time the Soviet Union ceased to exist. We agreed to that, so we are people of our word. It's when the Ukrainians started to let NATO in and change the agreement to renege on the fundamental understanding of what made a Ukraine acceptable to Russia. At that point in time, then it's open for discussion. And when the Ukrainians threatened Crimea in 2014, Russia took that off the map. Said no. When they attacked but here's the other thing: even when they attacked Donbass, when they slaughtered the people in Mariupol, they bombed the people in Mariupol, they bombed Donetsk, they sent the army in, they treated the Russians as terrorists. For 8 years, from 2014 to 2022, Russia still was willing to work with the Ukrainians to ensure the sovereignty of Ukrainian control over these territories because Russia respected the law. It was only when the introduction of NATO-trained forces and NATO threatened Russia that Russia had to take a different response. But the response wasn't precipitous. It came after 8 years of trying to negotiate a settlement. I just think, I can't speak for the Russian government. I can't speak for the Russian people. But just as an outside observer, why do you care what Europe thinks?
It's interesting. It's really interesting.
It's like me looking at a gopher digging a hole in my yard. It's interesting.
Not exactly.
But I'm going to go fill in the hole and kick out the gopher because I don't care. The gopher doesn't matter.
We don't have any problems with your backyard, and Europe is involved in ongoing military conflict with Russia, and Russians do care. Now we acknowledge this, now we acknowledge that, but you see, they are eager to search for the reasons of this acknowledgement, and that's why I asked you how you see it, because you are an expert, and somebody, myself, someone else, we see it from our perspective, and our perspective is not based on an experience like yours. And, it's not based on your intellect, let me say so, and that's why.
To have more insight into Russia than a Russian. So
yes, but it's very interesting what they talk, what they think, and how our favorite weapons inspector thinks about what they think. This is very interesting, and
let me put it this way: one of the reasons why I believe what I believe, is that I was in Crimea. I met with the Crimean leadership. I met with Crimean people. I was in Kherson. I met with the governor of Kherson. I met with his advisors. I spoke to the people of Kherson. I was in Zaporizhia. I was in Donetsk. I met with the governor of Donetsk. I met with, or the head of the Donetsk People's Republic. I met with soldiers and people there. Same thing in Lugansk. I'm not making things up. This isn't what Scott Ritter believes. I'm simply channeling what I've been told by the people that live in Crimea, by the people that live in New Russia. All right? And I take what they say seriously. And I've studied the historical foundations of their arguments. I've studied the factual, predicates that they've laid out there. And I have no complaint with how they've shaped, how they framed the issues. So this isn't me saying this is how I believe Russia should act or what my interpretation is. This is just me channeling what the Russian people have told me. And I believe them. When I look in their eyes, when I shake their hands, when I listen to the firmness of their voice, they convinced me that they believe they're part of Russia. And everybody I talk to in Russia, without exception, believes that they're Russian too. So if I were a Russian, that's all I'd care about. I don't care what Poland thinks. I really don't, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anybody outside of Russia thinks. It doesn't matter what the American president thinks. If he's thinking in a way that differs from the belief of the Russian people, then it doesn't matter. The only thing that the Russian people should be pushing for is a way to explain to Europe and America this reality and why it will never change, so that Europe and America can eventually say, yes, this is the reality that we have to learn to live with, that it's not going to change. And again, that we come back to where we started with Tucker Carlson's interview. I think anybody watching that interview would have had to have been impressed with the performance of Vladimir Putin. And the fact that this man knows his facts, he knows his history, and his beliefs were apparent to all, and these are good beliefs. I hope every American heard what he said about the Russian soul, and understands that if you're going to know Russia, you have to understand the Russian soul. I hope there's a revival of Dostoevsky in American universities. I hope people start reading the Brothers Karamazov. I hope they start talking about the Grand Inquisitor and what that means for the Russian people. Maybe they can read The Idiot. Maybe they can read more Dostoevsky works, read Tolstoy, understanding that the history that Vladimir Putin was providing the world through Tucker Carlson was a history that Tolstoy talked about in War and Peace. I mean, if you read Russian literature, you understand these things. But we stopped reading Russian literature. We allow people to tear down statues of Alexander Pushkin without appreciating what the Bronze Horsemen meant, what St. Petersburg is about. If you want to know Russia, read Russian literature. Go to Russia. Sink your hand into the dirt and smell it. Go sit down at a table and slice into some pelmeni and eat it. Eat some borscht. Drink some kvass. Go to the banya and get the crap beat out of you by birch leaves. Sweat it out with Russians in the banya, having heartfelt conversations. That's how you learn about Russia. And once you do that, you walk away and you say, there's nothing to fear here. These are friendly people. Look, I think the other thing that came across in this interview between Tucker and Vladimir Putin is that there are big differences between how Americans think and how Russians think. And there's nothing wrong with that. We operate differently. We're wired differently. We are not the same as Russians. I always say that we're the same, but we're not the same, because the Russians are burdened by the Russian soul. The Russian soul, for better or for worse, is imbued in them, and it defines them, it drives them. Americans aren't burdened by that. We're not burdened by our history. We're not burdened by the human experience that had to go through various filters of the Golden Horde. Listen to what Vladimir Putin was talking about. Listen to it. Understand it. But no, people dismiss it, call it Russian propaganda. Americans, we have our own history. We have our own way of operating. We have our own way of thinking. Our brains work differently. We're quicker. The Russians aren't quicker. What's the old saying? That the Russians are, slow to harness, but quick to ride. Americans, we want to throw the saddle on, giddy up, cowboy, and go. And the Russians are like, no, we're going to sort of think this one out here. But once they decide to harness the horse, to get the sled out there, to load it up, off they go, and you can't stop them. Two totally different approaches to life. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. It means that Americans are Americans, Russians are Russian. But we can live together in peace and harmony if we learn to understand one another. And I think, coming full circle to Tucker Carlson's interview, it opened the door of understanding. And the most important takeaway is that the Russian president was telling the world not only this is who we are, but we're ready to talk. We're ready to talk if, and only if, you respect who we are. And that's, I think, that was a good thing, a good outcome.
Scott, thank you so much. And that's why I ask you questions like that. Because, yes, you're channeling, the things you were addressing to, but you also reflect and, process them. That's why, and it's very interesting, it's very important to hear that from the, like my viewers say, from the most Russian American they know. Yes, they call you that, the most Russian American. And these are a few details which make things that you say, your opinion, immensely valuable. So I hope my stuttering English makes a more or less clear picture of what I wanted to say. Sometimes, yes, when sometimes I'm stutter like a monkey.
So do I.
It's okay.
You heard my speech in Chechnya, and when I speak Russian, you understand that I struggle with the Russian language.
Speaking of which, believe me on this one, it's not made out. My wife is teaching foreigners for 25 or maybe more years to speak Russian. She's a professional in that. She doesn't use other language while teaching foreigners, only Russian, and she knows what she's saying. She saw your speech and she said, Scott is brilliant to make the point even if he has difficulties to speak Russian. He's great in making point. This is one of the most important thing while learning language. So you told me once many people tried and many people failed teaching your Russian. You have great perspectives and you have lots of potential to speak Russian. So this is opinion of a person who taught Nigerian students, Chinese, Koreans, all sorts of, Pakistanians, and all of them have bunch of their problems of learning Russian. I once tried that also, and I said, thank you, but no thanks. I'm not gonna do that anymore because it's just too damn hard. Well, if she said that about you, so this is a thing which is, So that's what I, by the way, wanted to tell you, that you made a brilliant speech, heartfelt, with a great point, and you were understood by everybody. It's not only me speaking, it's my audience speaking. A lot of people made lots of comments under my videos. The comments are there. Well, about how good your speech was. And doesn't mean how many difficulties you felt experiencing while making that speech. And for that speech, we thank you enormously. That's absolutely genuine. So, Scott, one question left, and I don't think we have a lot of time or enough time for that, and we'll leave it for later. This is the... okay, I'll tell you later when we... Well, stop formal. Well, I'll tell you what the question is, and we'll save it for our next conversation. Well, for now, my ladies and gentlemen, Scott, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. And as always, very fascinating and really great. No one makes it like you do. Thank you so much.
Thank
Ladies
you.
and gentlemen, see you next time on Periscope Depth.